The Collapse video series is for entertainment purposes only. Do not commit acts of violence. 11 days since the grid went down. The governors are made aware of the problems in the National Guard. There is a rift between those who agree with the order to seize firearms and those who disagree. Soldiers are upset about the way resources have been hoarded by government officials and not distributed to the people. They are worried about their families. The Guard soldiers are in regular communication with the police, who feel much the same way. The governor joins the Guard soldiers and police in believing the cities may be a lost cause, with widespread civil unrest, extreme unsanitary conditions, fires that are out of control, and a lack of emergency services such as hospitals. The governors want to ensure the loyalty and continued service of the soldiers in the Guard. Through military communication channels, which are still operative, they recall the soldiers out of the city and order them to collect their families and meet at a designated location where they will set up camps for themselves and their families. Food and water are promised. In order to make up for the soldiers who have deserted, the governors invite city and state police to join the National Guard and bring their families to the encampments. In these desperate times, it's an offer the police can't refuse. With the National Guard and the police leaving, groups at first celebrate the total lack of law enforcement. It will be some time before they fully comprehend that this means no more supplies will be brought in. For now, they see the city as a place of abundance as it was before, except now they have free access to this perceived abundance. They begin scavenging in groups, often going into homes and apartments. Most of those homes have been abandoned, but sometimes unfortunate people are still in there, leading to confrontations with homeowners. The groups of petty troublemakers have become dangerous gangs of marauders. People in the suburbs are getting sick from drinking unclean water. After the sewer pump stopped and sewage backed up into the houses, people used the outdoors as a toilet at the same time they drank from streams and rivers. Those who understood the danger boiled their water before drinking it, but many became frustrated with this time-consuming task and foolishly began drinking water without boiling it. Normally in the United States, there are only about 350 to 400 cases of typhoid fever per year, though in these severely unsanitary conditions, those few cases quickly spread down the interconnected rivers. After 10 days, the number of infected is relatively few, but with no infrastructure in place to mitigate the spread, an epidemic of typhoid fever is inevitable. The die is cast. The suburbanites have another problem. They are on their last can of tuna. Most people have less than 2 weeks of non-perishable canned goods and dry foods in their kitchens and pantries. The influx of relatives from the city made them run out faster. Nearly everyone who has not been preparing for a long-term disaster is just about out of food. Supermarkets were picked clean a week ago. Grocery stores only keep about a 3-day supply of food. Those who live near food warehouses, food processing factories, and distribution centers find that the National Guard and Army have already seized everything. There are no stored supplies to be found. Only those who have stockpiled food in advance are likely to survive, and they are keeping very quiet about their stockpile. The suburbanites had been telling their children that the government would swoop in with supplies and save them, but at this point they are coming to terms with the fact that that's not going to happen. They are facing the reality that they and their children will have to leave the suburbs to find food. Rural areas in North America can roughly be split into 4 groups: farmland, forest, desert, and tundra. People in the farmland are most likely to survive, though there will be struggles. Very few people in the desert and tundra will survive unless they are exceptionally good at surviving those conditions. Those in the forested areas the Southeast US, the Northwest US and Western Canada, and the Northeast US and Eastern Canada. They might survive if they organize and start planting. The ground is fertile, and in fact, much of it used to be farmland. But a person will starve to death in less time than it takes to grow all of the food he needs. And then there is the security problem. In both the US and Canada, the bulk of the farmland is in the middle, while the population centers are on the coasts. People in farmland are far away from the cities. The forested areas, however, are in much closer proximity to population centers. It is possible that hordes of people from the suburbs and marauders from the city will come to them thinking they have food. They know they need to get organized, and that's what they do. It is decided that they must do 5 things as quickly as possible: collect and distribute water, manage human waste, form local militias, form hunting and fishing parties, and of course, start planting crops in every available space. Forests and rivers may get picked clean of game and fish quickly, but they just might have enough to get the people through until the crops can feed them. There is a global food problem. The large food-producing areas of the world are the US and Canada, Australia, much of South America, and a few other scattered nations. The United States is the world's largest net exporter of food, and the exports just stopped. A harvest has not yet been missed, but the governments around the world know that's coming and begin stockpiling the currently available food. The total supply of food hasn't actually significantly reduced yet, but the increase in demand makes its price increase. Even in food exporting countries like Brazil and Australia, the food is instantly more expensive because of the price it could fetch if sold elsewhere. This happens at the same time as massive layoffs from the collapsing world economy and increases in fuel prices. Around the world, especially in places like India, China, and Indonesia, literally hundreds of millions of people who could afford to feed their children last month are now struggling to give them rice. Things are unraveling quickly around the world. Job losses, the stock market crash, a run on the banks, fuel price increases, and food shortages are making the masses of people extremely anxious everywhere. They want their governments to fix the problem immediately, and they are willing to cede power to their governments to make that happen so they can feed their children. The Protector is in informal talks with OPEC to convince them to peg the price of oil to the euro and increase production of oil, bringing the price down. OPEC will need to meet and discuss, but discussions so far have been productive, and it seems likely that they will agree. In light of this, he begins temporarily subsidizing gasoline in Europe, bringing prices down immediately to where they were before. He contacts businesses in Asia to purchase their surplus of warehoused goods and parts at a fraction of the previous price. Without the US and Canadian markets, and in the middle of an economic crisis, they need to unload the goods. They don't like his price, but they accept it. European manufacturers stop laying off employees, since the decrease in the price of parts will give their businesses a boost. Retailers know that shortly they will have cheaper goods to sell, which will increase business enough that they can also stop laying off employees. The news doesn't cause European stocks to completely recover, but they do stabilize along with the unemployment rate. Public confidence in the Protector soars. The Protector reaches out to the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Canada. He will give them some aid, though he points out that Europe is also in crisis, so the aid will be limited. The President and Prime Minister are grateful. They announce their support for the Protector. The announcement doesn't reach the people of the US and Canada because of the grid down, but the rest of the world is aware of the support. In Mexico, the flood of refugees coming south from the United States is taking its toll. At first, the government of Mexico was determined to help the refugees, But with the global crisis, national support for refugees has evaporated. When the trucks of supplies don't come, they have nothing to eat or drink. Protests by the Mexican public against the refugees commence as word spreads that desperate refugees have begun stealing food and water. Even though those moving across the border are predominantly ethnic Mexican and Central American, many of them born in Mexico, they are seen as outsiders. Countries in the Caribbean that depend on tourism from the United States and Canada have had no business for over a week, and no one is expected to come anytime soon. In the region, over 11% of the working population is supported by tourism, either directly or indirectly. The tourism industry abruptly and completely closed overnight. There is no severance pay and there is no unemployment insurance. Adding on to the problem is the population of newly unemployed due to the global economic collapse, and the population of unemployed that existed before the collapse, bringing the total percent of unemployed in the Caribbean to 25%, which was the level of unemployment experienced in the United States during the Great Depression. The people are shocked and angry. They demonstrate against the government to provide them with economic relief, but there is no money or food to spare. If you would like to see an ad-free version of these videos, go to my BitChute or Brighteon page. Even with the ads, there is not nearly enough revenue to support continued production of the series. Please consider supporting me on Subscribestar or click on the PayPal link in the description.